Hey everybody, given our continued connection issues, I'm going to try something a little bit different here. I'm basically going to just pre-record what I was going to say. I'll be on the Zoom, so if you guys are going through this and you have any questions, you can just put it in the chat box. But for now, I'm done fighting those constant internet issues until I hear anything from MCPS. Okay, so last lesson we had talked about the production possibilities frontier. So we learned you don't want to be inside that curve because that means basically you're not accomplishing what you could accomplish. You're not producing what you could produce. And we learned that outside, like point B right here, is not attainable. Okay, so today we're going to take that a step further. All right, so the objectives. Number one, define the terms absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Just define what those things are and explain why it makes sense for countries to specialize and how this can expand their production possibilities frontier. Okay, so this is going to be the first day on comparative advantage, and we'll continue with this early next week. And this is one of the tricky topics. So if you're a little bit confused here early on, it's all right. This is a common difficult topic within the class. So we already kind of talked about that, right? So we got a country that's producing grain and wine. As long as they choose any output along this curve, it means they're operating efficiently. They're fully using their resources. So even if they decide to make 15 units of grain and 0 units of wine, they are still being efficient. Or opposite, 15 units of wine and 0 units of grain, they're still efficient. But if we had a combination of 3 and 3, the question is, well, what's that economy doing? They're not fully using their resources. So we want to be here. And again, we said you can't produce outside of that curve. Okay, today, the whole point of comparative advantage, you're going to see, well, if a country specializes on what they do best and what they have a comparative advantage in, it's possible for them to consume at point B. All right, so maybe this country only focuses on produces grain and then trades some of that grain to get wine that a country has more is easier to produce. And if they're producing grain and trading for wine, it could actually be over here. That's the whole point of what we're about to get into. So let's start with some definitions. Okay, and this slideshow is on my Canvas page. You can follow along. So absolute advantage is the ability of a country to carry out a particular economic activity more efficiently than another country. So an example here, let's say country A can produce 5 cars per hour with 10 employees. So I guess company works too. While company B can only produce 3 cars per hour with 10 employees. So in this case, the fact that company A can make more cars with the same amount of resources and manpower, they have the absolute advantage over company B. Okay. For this class, you need to know what that is, but we're not really concerned with absolute advantage. We're concerned with something called comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, this whole theory by this guy, David Ricardo, who was an English economist back in the 1700s, 1800s. Comparative advantage is the ability of a country to produce goods at a lower opportunity cost than another country. Okay, so we'll get into that more. So the theory of comparative advantage. Let me X out of this thing here. Total output will be greatest when each good is produced by the nation that has the lowest domestic opportunity cost for producing that good. So whoever has the comparative advantage, according to this theory, should specialize in the production of that good. So if it turns out back here that this country has a comparative advantage in grain, they should focus and only make grain, while another country who has a smaller comparative advantage in wine should make wine. I know it's confusing. It will make more sense by the end of the class. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask you pause this lecture and watch the crash course, and you got to complete part 1 of the assignment, which is right here. So watch this video, and you're going to go through and answer these questions. Okay, don't hit submit yet because you also have a part 2. And then when you're done, come back to the lecture. Okay, so continuing on. So here's an example, right? This is a common thing we're going to see in this class. My computer, there we go. So we've got country A who can make 200 bushels of wheat or 100 of something else. And we have country B who can make 100 bushels of wheat and 150 of something else. Okay, so let me share my screen here. Give me 1 second. Let me pull this up. Okay. So let me try to figure out how to get my screen share going here. Okay, so the steps to figure out who has a comparative advantage and who has an absolute advantage. Okay, so I'm going to encourage you to write this out. So we said country A. They can either make 200 wheat or 150. I'm going to call it good X because the axis doesn't identify it. Let's look at country B. Country B can make, hope I messed that up, 200 wheat or 100 of product X. Country B can make 100 wheat or 150 of product X. Okay, so now we got to figure out the opportunity cost. So I'm going to write this out. So I'm going to say country A's opportunity cost of focusing on wheat is what? So every time they can make twice as much wheat as they can of good X, which means every time they choose to produce one wheat, they are giving up 0.5 of product X, right? So let's think through that again. Country A can make 200 wheat or 100. Oh, I messed that up. No, that's right. 200 wheat or 100 of product X. They can make twice as much wheat as product X, which means the opportunity cost of making wheat is 0.5 of product X. Let's go the other way. Okay, country A's opportunity cost of product X is going to be what? It's going to be 2 wheat, right? Because they can make twice as much wheat. So if they choose to put all their energy into making 1 unit of good X, that means they're going to give up 2 units of wheat. Let's look at country B. Okay, I'll do it down here. Let me make sure this is centered for you. Okay, so country B. So B's opportunity cost of wheat is, so they can make 1.5 times as much X. So if they choose to make wheat, they're foregoing 1.5 units of good X. Okay, and we're going to say country B's opportunity cost of making unit X is going to be, right? So if we take, I'm going to pull out my calculator here. I probably should be able to do this in my head. But if we take 100 divided by 150, that's 2/3. Okay, so the opportunity cost of producing good X is going to be 2/3 of a wheat. Right, so every time they choose to make product X, they're going to give up 2/3 of wheat. Okay, so now the next step. So we just look at this and we think, well, who can make more? All right, absolute advantage is easy. Absolute advantage is just who can make more of the good. So we're looking at this. Country A can make 200 bushels of wheat, while country B can only make 100 bushels of wheat. So A has the absolute advantage in wheat production. Okay, then we look at the other way. So country A, the maximum amount of wheat they can make is 100, while country B, the maximum they can make is 150. So country B has the absolute advantage in product X, whatever we want to call it. Okay, comparative advantage is a little bit trickier. So comparative advantage is whoever has the lesser opportunity cost. So we look at this. When country A makes wheat, they give up 1/2 unit of X. When country B makes wheat, they give up 1.5 units of X. So A is giving up less when it chooses to make wheat. Okay, so again, they're giving up 0.5 units. Country B gives up 1.5 unit. So the fact that country A has a lower opportunity cost of wheat production means they have the comparative advantage. So country A has the comparative advantage in wheat? Okay, what about good X? Okay, so let's look at this. When country A makes good X, their opportunity cost is 2 wheat. When country B makes good X, their opportunity cost is 2/3 wheat. So the fact that country B gives up less by producing good X, that means they have the comparative advantage in the production of good X. Okay, so according to that theory from Ricardo, the country with the lower opportunity cost, the country with the comparative advantage, should focus on producing whatever product they have a comparative advantage in. So in this case, right, A is going to make wheat. Country B is going to make good X. That's the only thing they're going to do. A is going to focus all of its energy on wheat production. Country B is going to focus all of its energy on the production of good X. And then when they have the stockpile, okay, country A would save the wheat that it needed, but then it would trade some of that wheat to get good X from country B. Okay, it's okay if you're confused. We're going to go through this again. So let me go back to my other screen here. Let's use another example. Okay, so here's an example from Mr. Clifford. So it says United States can produce 20 planes or 2 cruise ships, while France can produce 12 planes or 2 cruise ships. And then we've got a couple questions. So when we look at the absolute advantage, right, the United States has the absolute advantage in production of planes. Neither country has an absolute advantage in cruise ships because they can each produce the same. So let's look at this first question. What is the opportunity cost for producing one of each product? All right, so let's write this out. Let me go back to my other screen here. And let me pull up. Okay, so we said US equals 20 planes or 2 cruise ships. France equals 12 planes or 2 cruise ships. So what's the opportunity cost? Okay, so US opportunity cost of one plane is, so for every plane they make, they can make 10 times as many planes, okay, which means they're going to give up 1/10 of a cruise ship. Okay, let's do it the other way. So the US opportunity cost of one cruise ship is, right, if they're going to focus on making one cruise ship, and I already said the United States can make 10 times as many planes as cruise ships, that means they're going to give up 10 planes. Now let's look at France. Okay, France opportunity cost of one plane, so they can make 6 times as many planes, right? So France's opportunity cost of one plane is 1/6 of a cruise ship, while France's opportunity cost of one cruise ship is going to be, you guessed it, 6 planes. Okay, so let's take a look. So who has a comparative advantage in planes, right? So comparative advantage, who has a lesser opportunity cost when they make planes? So when the United States makes planes, they're giving up only 1/10 of a cruise ship. When France makes planes, they're giving up 1/6 of the cruise ship. So the United States gives up less. US has a comparative advantage in planes. Okay, what about cruise ships? Okay, so if the United States makes one cruise ship, they're giving up 10 planes. If France makes one cruise ship, they're giving up 6 planes. 6 is less than 10. So France has a less opportunity cost, meaning France has got a comparative advantage in planes. So France has a comparative advantage in cruise ships because they're only giving up 6 planes. If the United States was making cruise ships, they would give up 10. Okay, so with this theory, right, this is the most important outcome. The U.S. would make planes, only planes. France would only make cruise ships. We'd have a stockpile of each, and then we trade. Okay, and if they traded, they'd actually have a better outcome. They could be able to consume outside of the production possibilities frontier. So I know that's a lot to take in. That's why I'm going to spend another day on this. And my goal for you guys today is just to have the basics and the basic understanding of how this works. Okay. So that being said, part 2 of the assignment, you're basically going to go through the steps I just did. Okay, so once you're done with the crash course questions, right underneath this is going to be part 2. All right, and let me fix this a little bit. Okay, so this chart below shows how many cans of olives and bottles of olive oil can be produced in Zaire and Colombia from 1 ton of olives. Okay, so Zaire can make 60 cans of olives, 10 bottles of olive oil. Colombia can make 24 cans of olives and 8 bottles of olive oil. So what I want you to do is go through these steps. I encourage you to write it out like I showed you how. You should be able to do questions 1 through 5, and I'm just interested in seeing what you come up, questions 1 through 6. And I'm interested in seeing what you come up with from question 7. I'm going to get into question 7 more next class. It's a tricky concept. Just give it a shot and let me know what you think. And again, once you're done with this, the time's yours to work. If you have questions, add it to the chat in the Zoom class. And I'm hoping that this works a little bit better for you guys.